Commander Jake Morrison stood at the large window of his spaceship. He watched Earth getting smaller and smaller as they moved away. The planet looked like a perfect blue marble floating in the darkness of space. It was beautiful and peaceful from up here, but Jake knew that peace would not last much longer. 3 months ago, aliens called the Galactic Council had come to Earth. They did not come as friends. They came with demands. The Council told humans they had to give up all their weapons and military ships. They said Earth had to let the Council rule over them. They called it being a protectorate species, but everyone knew what it really meant. It meant being slaves. The Council gave Earth a choice. Surrender everything or they would destroy all the major cities on Earth from space. They would kill millions of people. They would burn the planet until humans had no choice but to obey. The aliens thought humans would be scared. They thought Earth would surrender quickly, just like every other species they had threatened before. They had done this to hundreds of planets across the galaxy. They always won. No one ever fought back. But the Council made one big mistake. They did not understand humans. They did not know that humans had never been good at giving up when their lives were in danger. Jake looked around his ship, the EHS Defiance. It was not a beautiful ship. It was built from old mining equipment and parts from cargo ships. The walls had patches welded on them. The engines made strange noises. Sometimes the lights flickered. But it could fly and it could fight. That was all that mattered now. The Council had 700 warships. Each one was perfect and powerful. They had shields that could stop nuclear weapons. They had guns that could cut through metal like it was paper. They had been built by aliens who had been making spaceships for thousands of years. Earth had 43 ships. Most of them were like the Defiance. They were not real military ships. They were whatever humans could build quickly with the materials they had. If you looked at the numbers, Earth had no chance. Surrender was the smart choice. It was the logical choice. But Jake had been a soldier for 15 years. He had learned something important during that time. When humans were fighting for their survival, they stopped caring about logic. They stopped caring about numbers. They just fought. A screen on the wall lit up. Admiral Catherine Blake appeared. She was in charge of all Earth's military forces. Her gray hair was pulled back tight. Her face looked hard as stone. She had been a soldier even longer than Jake. She had seen wars and battles that most people only read about in history books. Catherine spoke in a calm voice. She told Jake that the Council fleet had just entered the outer edge of their solar system. They were 3 days away from Earth. In 3 days, the battle would begin. Jake asked if they were ready. Catherine smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a wolf showing its teeth. She said they had been ready since the moment the first alien ship appeared in their sky and told them what to do. The communication ended. Jake turned to look at his crew. These were good people. They knew they might die in 3 days. They knew the odds were against them. But every single person on the bridge was calm and focused on their work. Lieutenant Danny Chen sat at the weapons station. His hands moved quickly over the controls, checking every missile and every gun on the ship. Danny was young, only 25 years old. Before the aliens came, he had been studying engineering at a university. Now he was one of their best weapons officers. Engineer Lisa Grant was watching the reactor. The reactor was the heart of the ship. It gave them power for everything. Lisa had taken an alien power core that humans had found on a crashed scout ship and made it work in their ship. The aliens who built it never imagined it could put out this much power. Lisa had made it stronger, but that also made it dangerous. If she pushed it too hard, it could explode and kill everyone on the ship. Jake walked over to the pilot station. He put his hand on the shoulder of the pilot, a woman named Helen Cruz. Helen had been flying cargo ships for 20 years before the war started. She knew how to make a ship do things it was not supposed to do. She had flown the Defiance through an asteroid field once with Council ships chasing them. She had not lost them. She had led the Council ships into the asteroids and 3 of them had crashed. Helen had brought the Defiance home without a scratch. Jake told his crew that they all knew what was coming. He said the Council thought this would be easy. They thought humans would see their big fleet and give up. He said the Council was about to learn something that every creature on Earth had learned the hard way over millions of years. He told them that humans did not give up. Humans did not quit. When you pushed humans into a corner and threatened everything they loved, they did not surrender. They fought back. And they kept fighting until either they won or there was nothing left of them to fight with. Earth had spent 10,000 years fighting. They had fought the ice and the cold. They had fought wild animals with teeth and claws. They had fought diseases that killed millions. They had fought each other in terrible wars. They had fought droughts and floods and earthquakes and storms. Every single time, humans had survived. They had survived because they refused to die. The Council was just another threat, just another enemy trying to destroy humanity. They had better technology, more ships, and thousands of years of experience. But they had never fought anyone like humans before. Danny looked up from his station. He said all weapons were ready. Every missile was loaded. Every gun was charged. They could fire everything they had the moment the Council ships got close enough. Lisa reported that the reactor was running at full power. She said she could push it higher if they needed to, but it would be dangerous. Jake told her to be ready to push it as high as it would go when the battle started. If they were going to fight, they would fight with everything they had. Helen checked their course. She said they were moving into position with the rest of the fleet. All 43 Earthships were spreading out into a wide formation. From space, it must look like they were trying to make their small fleet look bigger. The Council would probably laugh at them. Let them laugh, Jake thought. Humans had been underestimated before. People who underestimated humans usually regretted it. Usually, by the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Jake looked at Earth one more time. His wife was down there. His 2 children were down there. His parents, his friends, everyone he had ever known or loved. They were all on that blue planet. The Council wanted to threaten them. The Council wanted to kill them if humans did not obey. That was their second mistake. You do not threaten someone's family and expect them to be reasonable. You do not tell a parent that you will hurt their children and think they will surrender peacefully. When you threaten a human's family, you do not get surrender. You get war. The Council was about to start a war. They thought they knew what war was. They had fought hundreds of wars across the galaxy, but those were wars against species that fought by rules, species that surrendered when the math said they could not win. Humans did not follow those rules. Humans had learned war on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. They had learned to fight dirty. They had learned to never give up. They had learned that sometimes the only way to, survive was to make sure your enemy paid such a terrible price that they wished they had never started the fight. Jake took a deep breath and sat down in his command chair. He looked at his crew one more time. They were ready. He was ready. Earth was ready. 3 days, he thought. In 3 days, the Galactic Council would learn the most important lesson in human history. You should never mess with Earth. 5 years ago, the world had been different. 5 years ago, humans thought they were alone in the universe. Then the Galactic Council arrived and everything changed. Jake remembered that day clearly. He had been at home with his family, watching the news on television. Every channel showed the same thing. Alien ships in the sky, huge vessels that hung in the air above every major city on Earth. They did not attack. They did not threaten. They just waited. Then they sent a message. They said they were the Galactic Council. They said they represented thousands of planets and hundreds of different alien species. They said they came in peace. They wanted to share their technology with Earth. They wanted to trade with humans. They wanted to welcome Earth into the galactic community. The whole world celebrated. People danced in the streets. They thought this was the beginning of a new golden age for humanity. No more war, no more hunger. The aliens had technology that could solve all of Earth's problems. It seemed too good to be true. It was too good to be true. Ambassador Patricia Holland led the negotiations with the Council. She was smart and experienced. She had worked in diplomacy for 30 years. She spoke 5 different Earth languages. She had helped negotiate peace deals in some of the worst conflicts in recent history. If anyone could deal with aliens, it was Patricia. For the first few months, everything seemed wonderful. The Council shared some of their technology. They gave Earth clean energy systems that could power entire cities without pollution. They gave medical technology that could cure diseases that had killed millions of people. They shared farming techniques that could grow food in places where nothing had grown before, but there was always a catch. Every piece of technology came with conditions. Every trade deal had terms that favored the Council. Every agreement gave them a little more control over Earth. Patricia started to see the pattern. The Council was not sharing their technology as friends. They were using it as a trap. Earth was becoming dependent on their technology. The energy systems needed special fuel that only the Council could provide. The medical machines needed parts that only came from Council worlds. The farming equipment would not work without Council technicians to maintain it. When Patricia tried to negotiate better terms, the Council representative smiled and said no. They told her these were the standard agreements. Every planet in the Council had signed the same deals. It was not personal. It was just business, but it felt very personal to Patricia. She realized the Council did not want partners. They did not want friends. They wanted servants. They wanted to make Earth so dependent on their technology that humans would have no choice but to do whatever the Council demanded. 6 months after first contact, Patricia went to a meeting with High Arbiter Ven. Ven was the leader of the Council delegation to Earth. He was tall, thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. He always spoke in a calm, quiet voice. He always smiled. Patricia had learned to hate that smile. At that meeting, Ven dropped all pretense of friendship. He told Patricia that Earth needed to sign a new agreement. This agreement would put Earth under Council protection. It meant the Council would manage Earth's military, control trade with other planets, and have final authority over Earth's government. Patricia asked what would happen if Earth refused to sign. Ven stopped smiling. He said that would be unfortunate. He said Earth was in the Council's territory. All planets in this territory were required to accept Council protection. If Earth refused, they would be considered a rogue state. Rogue states were dangerous. The Council had ways of dealing with dangerous planets. Patricia stood up and told Ven that Earth would not sign his agreement. She said humanity had spent thousands of years fighting for their freedom. They had fought kings and emperors and dictators. They were not going to give up their freedom now, not even to aliens with fancy technology. Ven looked surprised. He said Patricia was being emotional and irrational. He said humans were still young and primitive. They did not understand how the galaxy worked. He said every species eventually learned to accept Council guidance. It was for their own good. Patricia smiled at Ven. She told him that he had just called humans primitive and young. She said he was right. Humans were young compared to the Council, but being young did not mean being stupid, and primitive did not mean weak. She told Ven that humans had evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. They had survived ice ages that should have wiped them out. They had survived diseases that killed half their population. They had survived wars where they used weapons that could destroy entire cities. They had survived all of it because humans were very, very good at not dying. Then Patricia walked out of the negotiations. She never went back. That was when the Council stopped being friendly. Economic sanctions came first. They blocked Earth from trading with any other planets. They cut off the supply of fuel and parts for the technology they had given Earth. They wanted to show humans what happened when you refused the Council. But the sanctions did not break humanity. Instead, they made humans angry. Scientists started working day and night to figure out how the alien technology worked. They wanted to make their own versions that did not need Council supplies. Engineers started building new ships and weapons using whatever they could learn from the alien technology. When the sanctions did not work, the Council sent warships to blockade Earth. They said no ships could leave or enter the solar system without Council permission. They thought this would force Earth to negotiate. Instead, it gave humans a chance to study Council warships up close. Small human scout ships would sneak close to the Council blockade. They would scan the alien ships and learn how their shields worked, how their weapons worked, how their engines worked. It was dangerous. Several scout ships were destroyed, but the information they gathered was worth it. Every nation on Earth contributed to the war effort. Countries that had been enemies for decades worked together. They shared their scientists, their factories, their resources. The United States shared its military technology. Russia shared its rocket designs. China shared its manufacturing capabilities. Europe shared its research. Africa shared its raw materials. South America shared its energy resources. Every continent, every nation, every person on Earth worked together for the first time in human history. They built 43 ships. They were not beautiful or perfect. They were built fast with whatever materials were available. But they could fly, they could fight, and they were crewed by people who would rather die than surrender. Finally, 3 months ago, Ven had sent his ultimatum. Surrender or die, give up all weapons and accept Council rule. or the Council would destroy every major city on Earth from orbit. He gave Earth 1 month to decide. Patricia appeared on every television and computer screen on Earth. She told the world what Ven had demanded. Then she told them what Earth's answer would be. She said humanity had voted. Every nation had agreed. They would not surrender. They would fight. People knew what that meant. Many of them would die. Maybe all of them would die. But they would die free. They would die fighting. That was better than living as slaves. Volunteers flooded the recruitment centers. Young people and old people, men and women. People who had never held a weapon before trained to be soldiers. People who had never been in space trained to crew the ships. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone wanted to fight. Jake had been one of those volunteers. He had been a teacher before the Council came. He taught history at a high school. He had never thought he would be a soldier again. He had served in the military when he was younger, but that had been years ago. He had a wife and children now. He had a peaceful life, but when the Council threatened Earth, he knew he had to fight. His wife cried when he told her. His children were too young to understand, but they hugged him and told him to come home safe. He promised he would try. Now here he was, commanding a ship made from scrap metal and hope. In 3 days he would face an enemy that had conquered hundreds of planets. An enemy with better weapons, better ships, and more experience. But Jake had learned something important teaching history. Throughout human history, the underdog had won more often than people expected. The small army that refused to quit could defeat the large army that thought victory was certain. The colonists with old hunting rifles had defeated the most powerful empire on Earth. The farmers with determination had outlasted professional soldiers. Time and time again, people who should have lost had won because they wanted it more. The Council had better technology, but Earth had something the Council had forgotten about. Earth had desperation. Earth had courage. Earth had the absolute refusal to accept defeat. In 3 days, the Council would learn what that meant. 3 days passed like 3 years. The crew of the Defiance checked their weapons over and over. They ran practice drills until they could do everything in their sleep. They tried to stay calm, but everyone knew what was coming. Then the Council fleet arrived. Jake stood on the bridge and looked at the screen showing the enemy ships. There were so many of them. 700 warships appearing out of jump space in perfect formation. Each ship was beautiful in a way that made Jake's heart sink. They were sleek and deadly. Their hulls were smooth and perfect. They moved together like a school of fish, each one knowing exactly where to go. The Earth fleet looked pathetic in comparison. 43 ships that looked like they might fall apart at any moment. They were different sizes and shapes. Some were big and slow, some were small and fast. None of them matched. They looked like exactly what they were. A desperate attempt by desperate people. A message came through from the Council flagship. It was High Arbiter Ven. His face appeared on every screen in every Earth ship. He looked calm and confident. He looked like someone who had already won. Ven spoke slowly like he was talking to children. He said this was humanity's last chance. Surrender now and the Council would be merciful. All humans had to do was power down their weapons and accept Council authority. If they did this, no one would die today. He said if Earth refused, the Council would destroy them. Every ship would be reduced to dust. Then they would destroy every city on Earth until humanity begged for mercy. He said this did not have to happen. The choice was simple. Surrender and live or fight and die. Ven gave them 1 hour to respond. Admiral Catherine Blake did not wait 1 hour. She did not wait 1 minute. She opened a channel to the Council fleet immediately. Her face appeared on their screens. She looked tired and old, but her eyes were hard as diamonds. Catherine said just 2 words. She said no and thank you. Then she closed the channel. For a moment there was silence. The Council fleet did not move. They seemed surprised that anyone would refuse them so quickly and so simply. Then the battle began. The Council fleet moved forward in their perfect formation. They came slowly and carefully like they were on parade. They had done this hundreds of times before against hundreds of different enemies. They had a plan. They had tactics. They had centuries of military experience. The Earth fleet scattered. The 43 human ships broke in every direction like a bomb had exploded among them. There was no formation. There was no plan that the Council could see. It looked like chaos. It looked like panic. The Council commanders looked at each other in confusion. This was not how space battles worked. You were supposed to hold formation. You were supposed to concentrate your fire. You were supposed to fight with discipline and order. Humans had never been very good at following rules. The Defiance dove straight down, passing underneath the Council flagship so close that Jake could see the details on its hull. Danny Chen fired every missile they had, not at the flagship, but at 3 smaller destroyers that were guarding it. The missiles were not fancy or high-tech. They were just big chunks of metal with rockets attached. But they were moving very, very fast. When they hit the Council destroyers, the force of impact was enormous. Shields that could stop energy weapons could not stop solid objects moving at such high speed. 2 of the destroyers exploded immediately. The third went dark, spinning away dead in space. Helen Cruz pushed the Defiance's engines to maximum power. The ship shook and groaned. Alarms went off. Lisa Grant shouted that they were pushing the engines way past their safety limits. Jake told her to push harder. All around them, the other Earth ships were doing the same thing. They flew in crazy patterns that made no sense. They ignored their own safety. They pushed their ships past the breaking point. Council ships tried to target them but could not keep up. The humans were moving too fast, too randomly, too recklessly. Captain Laura Gibson commanded a small frigate called the Fighting Spirit. Her ship took a direct hit from a Council cruiser. Half her ship was blown away. Life support was failing. The engines were dying. Any sane person would have ordered the crew to abandon ship. Laura was not interested in being sane. She aimed her dying ship at the cruiser that had shot her. She pushed the engines to full power and rammed it head-on. Both ships exploded in a ball of fire that lit up space like a small sun. Lieutenant Kevin Palmer saw 7 Council ships grouped close together. He had an idea. He told his crew to evacuate in the escape pods. Then he set his reactor to overload and flew straight into the middle of the enemy formation. The explosion was so big it destroyed all 7 Council ships and damaged a dozen more. The Council had never seen anything like this. They fought wars to win territory or resources. They accepted surrender when the enemy was beaten. They followed rules about how warfare was conducted. Humans did not care about rules. Humans did not care about winning territory. They cared about making sure that even if they lost, the Council would remember this day forever. They wanted the Council to wake up with nightmares about fighting humans. They wanted every Council commander to think twice before threatening another planet. The battle raged for 4 hours. Space was full of fire and explosions and dying ships. The Council lost 200 ships. Earth lost 30. By any logical measure, the Council was still winning. They had 500 ships left. Earth had 13. The math still said the Council would win eventually, but something had changed. The Council fleet was no longer advancing. They were trying to regroup. They were trying to figure out how to fight an enemy that refused to behave the way enemies were supposed to behave. High Arbiter Venn sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display. He had led the Council military for 50 years. He had conquered 30 planets. He had never lost a battle. He was not losing this battle either. The numbers still favored the Council. But he was paying a price he had never expected to pay. For every human ship they destroyed, the Council lost 15 of their own. At this rate, even if they won, they would lose their entire fleet doing it. Venn did not understand. Why would not these humans surrender? Could they not see they were beaten? Did they not understand mathematics? What Venn did not understand was that humans had never cared much about mathematics when someone threatened their home. You could show them all the numbers you wanted. You could prove logically that they could not win. They would smile and nod and then fight anyway, because humans had learned something during their long, violent history. Sometimes you do not fight to win. Sometimes you fight to make sure your enemy knows they picked the wrong target. Sometimes you fight to make sure that even if you die, you take so many of them with you that they regret ever hearing your name. Jake looked at the tactical display on his screen. The Defiance had taken damage. They were leaking air. Half their weapons were destroyed. The engines were making a sound like they might explode at any second, but they were still flying. They were still fighting. And all around them, 12 other human ships were doing the same thing. Then Admiral Blake sent new orders to all ships. She told them to fall back toward the moon. Jake almost questioned the order. It looked like retreat. But then he saw the expression on Catherine's face on the comm screen and he understood. Admiral Blake had one more surprise for the Council. One more card to play, and when she played it, This battle was going to end in a way the Council would never forget. The 13 remaining Earth ships moved quickly toward the moon. The Council fleet followed them slowly, carefully. High Arbiter Ven was suspicious now. The humans had surprised him too many times already. He did not trust this retreat, but what choice did he have? He could not let the human ships escape. He had to finish this battle. The Council had already paid too high a price. They had lost more ships in this one battle than they had lost in the last 20 years of warfare. Ven needed to end this quickly before his superiors started asking uncomfortable questions. The Defiance limped behind the moon with the other survivors. Jake looked at his crew. They were exhausted. Danny Chen had burns on his arms from a console that had exploded. Lisa Grant was covered in grease and coolant from emergency repairs. Helen Cruz had blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead, but they were all still at their posts. They were all still fighting. Jake felt a surge of pride so strong it almost hurt. These people were the best of humanity. They represented everything good about their species. Courage, determination, and the refusal to quit no matter how bad things got. Then something impossible happened. More ships started appearing. Not Council ships, human ships. But not military ships either. 300 civilian vessels dropped out of jump space all around the Council fleet. They were cargo ships and mining vessels. They were luxury cruise ships and scientific research boats. They were private yachts and commercial freighters. Some of them were so old they still used chemical rockets instead of alien technology. Every single one of them had weapons bolted onto their hulls. The weapons were crude and mismatched. Some were mining lasers. Some were industrial cutting tools. Some were homemade missiles that looked like they might explode before they reached their target. Jake recognized the lead ship. It was the Lucky Strike, a mining vessel that had been working in the asteroid belt. The captain was Stephen Hughes, a 60-year-old miner who had been in space for 40 years. Stephen opened a channel that broadcast to every ship in the area, human and alien alike. His face appeared on the screens. He had a gray beard and deep lines around his eyes from years of squinting at monitors. He looked like somebody's grandfather. He looked like a kind, gentle man. Stephen told everyone he had 17 grandchildren back on Earth. He said their names slowly, one by one. He said they were good kids, smart kids. They had their whole lives ahead of them. He said anyone who wanted to threaten those kids would have to go through him first. Then he said something that made Jake's blood run cold. Stephen said he did not have any fancy weapons or shields. His ship was just a tough old mining vessel with some lasers that could cut through asteroids. But asteroids did not dodge or shoot back. Council ships did. Stephen said he probably would not survive this battle. Most of the civilian ships probably would not survive. But that was okay. He had lived a good life. He had seen his children grow up and have children of their own. He had done his job and built a good home for his family. Now his job was to make sure those grandchildren had a future, and if that meant dying today, then that was what he would do. He said every person on every civilian ship felt the same way. The civilian fleet attacked. 300 ships crashed into the Council's flank like a tidal wave. They had no training. They had no coordination. They just charged forward and started shooting at anything that looked alien. A luxury cruise ship called the Star Princess rammed a Council destroyer. The Princess was built for carrying rich tourists, not fighting wars. But its captain, a woman named Gloria Martinez, aimed her ship at the enemy and pushed the engines to maximum. The collision destroyed both ships, but it also opened a hole in the Council's formation. A scientific research vessel called the Discovery used its sensor array to jam Council communications. The jamming did not last long before Council ships destroyed the Discovery, but those few minutes of confusion were enough. Human ships poured through the gap in the formation and started hitting the Council from inside their own lines. Stephen Hughes kept his promise. He flew the Lucky Strike straight at a Council command ship. His mining lasers were never meant for combat, but they were incredibly powerful tools designed to cut through solid rock. He aimed them at the Council ship's engines and fired continuously. The Council ship's shields held for almost 30 seconds. Then they failed. The mining lasers cut through the engines like butter. The Council ship went dead in space. Stephen's ship took a direct hit from another enemy vessel and exploded, but he had accomplished his mission. High Arbiter Ven watched his perfect battle plan collapse into total chaos. His fleet was surrounded now. The remaining military ships were attacking from behind the moon. The civilian ships were attacking from every other direction. The civilians had no shields. Their weapons were weak. One good hit would destroy any of them. But there were so many of them, and they kept coming like they did not care about dying, because they did not care. Every person on those civilian ships had made peace with their death before they jumped into the battle. They had said goodbye to their families. They had written letters to be delivered if they did not come back. They had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Ben realized something terrible. He was going to lose this battle, not because the humans had better weapons or better ships, not because they had better tactics or better training. He was going to lose because the humans were willing to pay any price, make any sacrifice, accept any loss to protect their home. The Council fought wars to gain resources or territory. They calculated acceptable losses. They knew when to retreat. They fought like rational beings who valued their own lives. Humans were not rational when you threatened their families. Humans became monsters, beautiful, terrible monsters who would burn down the entire galaxy if that was what it took to keep their children safe. The battle continued for another 2 hours. The Council lost 100 more ships. 50 of the civilian vessels were destroyed. The military ships were down to 8 survivors, including the Defiance, but the Council fleet was broken now. They were scattered and disorganized. Ven tried to rally them, tried to reform the line, but it was no use. His commanders were reporting massive casualties. Ships that had survived were damaged and low on ammunition. Morale was collapsing. Then Admiral Catherine Blake sent a message to all ships. She told the human forces to fall back and regroup behind the moon. Jake was confused. They were winning. The Council was on the defensive. Why stop now? Then he understood. Catherine was giving the Council a chance to retreat. She was giving Ven an opportunity to withdraw with some dignity and tact. It was mercy, but it was also a warning. The message was clear. Earth could have pressed the attack. They could have kept fighting until every Council ship was destroyed, but they were choosing not to. They were showing that humans could be merciful even in victory, but the message also said something else. It said that if the Council refused this mercy and kept fighting, Earth would show no mercy in return. They would fight until the Council fleet was completely destroyed, no matter what it cost. Ven stared at the tactical display. He had 400 ships left out of 700. The humans had maybe 200 vessels remaining if you counted the civilian ships. By the numbers, he could still win. But Ven had learned to fear the humans and their disregard for numbers. If he kept fighting, he might destroy every human ship. But in the process, the humans would destroy his entire fleet. He would win a battle and lose his career, his reputation, and probably his life when the Council leadership demanded to know how he had lost 700 ships fighting a primitive species. Ven made his decision. He ordered his fleet to hold position and cease fire. Then he opened a channel to Admiral Blake. It was time to negotiate a surrender. Not Earth's surrender. His own. Admiral Catherine Blake appeared on High Arbiter Ven's screen. She looked tired. Her uniform was dirty. There was a bandage on her left hand. But her eyes were sharp and clear. She looked like someone who had won a victory and knew it. Ven tried to maintain his dignity. He was still a High Arbiter of the Galactic Council. He had ruled over thousands of worlds. He would not beg for mercy from these primitive humans. But his voice shook slightly when he spoke. He told Catherine that the Council was willing to discuss terms for ending the hostilities. He said both sides had fought bravely. He said there was no need for more bloodshed. They could find a diplomatic solution. Catherine listened without expression. When Ven finished talking, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was not a nice smile. She told Ven that 3 months ago he had given Earth an ultimatum, surrender or die. She said he had not been interested in diplomatic solutions then. He had not cared about avoiding bloodshed then. He had been perfectly happy to threaten to kill millions of civilians. She said now the situation was different. Now humans had proven they could fight. Now the Council understood that conquering Earth would cost more than it was worth. Now suddenly Ven wanted to talk about diplomacy. Ven's face turned darker. He started to argue, but Catherine cut him off. She said she would give him the same choice he had given Earth. Accept her terms or the battle would continue. She said she would not negotiate. She would simply tell him what was going to happen, and he would agree or his fleet would be destroyed. Ven realized he had no choice. He asked what her terms were. Catherine's terms were simple and non-negotiable. First, all Council forces would immediately withdraw from human space. That meant Earth's solar system and any other systems that humans had explored or claimed. The Council would leave and never return without permission. Second, all economic sanctions and blockades against Earth would end immediately. Humans would be free to trade with any species they wanted. The Council would not interfere or try to control human commerce. Third, Earth would be recognized as an independent sovereign power. Not a protectorate, not a member of the Council, an independent nation with the right to make its own decisions and defend its own interests. Fourth, the Council would pay reparations for the human ships and lives lost in this battle. The payment would be in the form of technology and resources that Earth could use to rebuild. Ven started to protest. He said these terms were outrageous. He said the Council would never agree to pay reparations to a species they had been trying to conquer. He said his superiors would never accept such humiliating conditions. Catherine's smile grew wider. She said Ven could refuse her terms if he wanted. She said the battle could continue. She said Earth had plenty of fight left in them. Did the Council? She said Ven should think carefully about what he would tell his superiors. Would he tell them he conquered Earth? Or would he tell them he lost 700 ships and gained nothing? She said if he accepted her terms now, he could tell his superiors that he had negotiated a peace treaty. He could say Earth had proven too difficult to conquer, and the Council had decided to recognize them as an independent power. It would not be a victory, but it would not be a complete disaster either. But if he refused and the battle continued, Ven would lose his entire fleet. Then he would have to explain to the Council leadership how he had managed to get 700 ships destroyed by a species that had only been in space for a few years. Ben sat in his command chair and felt the weight of his decision. He had been so confident 3 days ago. He had 700 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy. He had been certain this would be a quick and easy victory. Now he had 400 damaged ships and a fleet that was ready to mutiny if he ordered them to keep fighting these insane humans. He thought about his options. He could refuse Catherine's terms and try to rally his fleet for one more attack. Maybe they would win. Maybe they would destroy every human ship and then bombard Earth until the planet surrendered. But probably not. Probably the humans would destroy the rest of his fleet. And even if he won, what would he have gained? A planet full of angry humans who would spend the rest of their existence plotting revenge. A species that would rather die than submit to Council authority. Or he could accept Catherine's terms. He could withdraw his fleet and tell the Council that Earth was too dangerous to conquer. He could recommend that they leave humans alone and focus on easier targets. It was not really a choice at all. Ven told Catherine he accepted her terms. All of them. The Council fleet would withdraw immediately. The blockade would end. Earth would be recognized as independent. The reparations would be paid. Catherine nodded. She said she was glad Ven had made the smart choice. She said Earth did not want war with the Council. Humans wanted peace and cooperation, but she wanted to make one thing very clear. She said if the Council ever came back to Earth with hostile intent, there would be no negotiations. There would be no mercy. Earth would not stop at defending themselves. They would hunt down every Council ship and every Council world until the entire galaxy understood one simple truth. You do not mess with Earth. The communication ended. Ven immediately gave orders to his fleet. They would jump back to Council space as quickly as possible. They would leave this cursed system and these terrifying humans behind. One by one, the Council ships activated their jump drives and disappeared. Within an hour, the entire fleet was gone. They left behind wreckage and debris from 300 destroyed vessels. They left behind a lesson that would echo through the galaxy for generations. On the bridge of the Defiance, Jake Morrison watched the last Council ship vanish from his screen. For a moment, nobody spoke. They all just stared at the empty space where the enemy had been. Then Danny Chen started laughing. It was a tired, slightly hysterical laugh, but it was genuine. Lisa Grant joined in, then Helen Cruz. Soon the entire bridge crew was laughing and crying and hugging each other. They had won. Against all odds, against all logic, against 700 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, they had won. Jake opened a channel to the other surviving ships. He saw tired, bloody, happy faces staring back at him from a dozen different screens. These people had fought beside him. They had faced death together. They had survived together. Admiral Catherine Blake's face appeared on the main screen. She told all ships to begin recovery operations. They needed to rescue survivors from the destroyed vessels. They needed to salvage what they could from the wreckage. They needed to get the wounded to medical facilities. But first, she said, they needed to remember, 21,000 humans had died in this battle, 21,000 people who had refused to surrender, 21,000 heroes who had given everything to protect their home. She said Earth would build a monument to honor them. Their names would be carved in stone. Their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Children would learn their names in school. Poets would write songs about them. Historians would study this battle for centuries, because this was the day humanity proved something important. They proved that humans could not be bullied. They proved that humans would rather die free than live as slaves. They proved that Earth would never surrender to anyone or anything. Jake looked out at Earth. The planet was still there, blue and beautiful and safe. His wife was down there. His children were down there. They would grow up in a world that was free and independent. They would grow up knowing that when humanity was threatened, humans had fought back and won. The battle was over. The war was won, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. 1 week after the battle, Jake Morrison stood in front of his house. It looked exactly the same as when he had left 3 months ago. The grass needed cutting. The paint on the front door was starting to peel. His daughter's bicycle was lying on its side in the driveway. Everything was normal and ordinary and perfect. The front door opened before he could knock. His wife stood there with tears running down her face. She did not say anything. She just grabbed him and held on tight. His 2 children came running and wrapped their arms around his legs. Jake had thought about this moment every day during the battle. He had wondered if he would ever see his family again. Now here they were, safe and whole and real. His daughter asked if the aliens were gone. She was only 7 years old. She did not really understand what had happened. She just knew that bad aliens had wanted to hurt Earth and her daddy had gone away to stop them. Jake knelt down and looked into her eyes. He told her the aliens were gone. They would not come back. She was safe now. Everyone on Earth was safe. His son, who was 10 years old, asked if they had won. Jake smiled and said yes. They had won. That night, after the children were asleep, Jake sat with his wife on their back porch. They drank coffee and looked at the stars. Those stars had seemed so far away when he was young. Now he had been out there among them. He had fought and nearly died out there. His wife asked him what it had been like. Jake did not know how to answer. How could he explain the terror of facing 700 enemy ships? How could he describe watching friends die? How could he put into words the moment when he thought they were all going to lose? He told her it had been the hardest thing he had ever done. He said there were moments when he was sure they were all going to die. But he also said he was proud. Proud of his crew. Proud of every human who had fought. Proud of what they had accomplished together. His wife was quiet for a long time. Then she said she had been terrified every single day he was gone. She said she had watched the news constantly, looking for information about the battle. She said when they announced that Earth had won, she had collapsed on the floor and cried for an hour. Jake held her hand and did not say anything. There was nothing to say. They were together now. That was all that mattered. The next day, Jake went to visit Danny Chen in the hospital. Danny had suffered severe burns during the battle. He would recover, but it would take time. When Jake walked into his room, Danny was sitting up in bed watching the news. The news was full of stories about the battle. They called it the Battle of Earth. Already people were analyzing what had happened. Military experts were studying the tactics. Scientists were examining the wreckage of council ships to learn more about alien technology. But most of the news was about the people who had fought. The heroes who had given everything to protect Earth. They showed pictures and told stories. They interviewed families of the fallen. They talked about the courage and sacrifice. Danny turned off the television when Jake entered. He asked how Jake was doing. Jake said he was fine. He asked Danny the same question. Danny smiled and said he had been better, but he would survive. They talked for a while about nothing important. They talked about the food in the hospital. They talked about the weather. They talked about sports. They did not talk about the battle. They did not need to. They had been there together. They understood what they had been through. When Jake was leaving, Danny said something that made him stop. Danny said he had been thinking about why they won. It was not because they had better weapons or better ships. It was not because they were smarter or stronger. They won because the Council had been fighting for pride and power. But humans had been fighting for their families, for their homes, for their future. And people who are fighting for those things do not quit. They do not surrender. They fight until they win or until there is nothing left of them. Jake nodded. Danny was right. That was exactly why they had won. 3 months later, Earth held a ceremony to honor the fallen. They built a monument in Geneva, where the United Nations headquarters was located. The monument was simple but beautiful. It was a tall black stone wall with 21,000 names carved into it. People came from all over the world to see the monument. They stood in front of it and read the names. They touched the carved letters. They left flowers and flags and personal items. They remembered. Admiral Catherine Blake gave a speech at the ceremony. She spoke about courage and sacrifice. She spoke about the price of freedom. She said the people whose names were on this wall had given everything so that others could live in peace. She said Earth would never forget them. Their names would be taught to every child. Their story would be told for generations. They had saved humanity from slavery and conquest. They were heroes in the truest sense of the word. But Catherine also said something else. She said this monument was not just about remembering the past, it was about preparing for the future. The Galactic Council had learned that Earth could not be conquered easily. But there were other threats out there in the galaxy. Other species that might see humanity as weak or vulnerable. She said Earth needed to be ready. They needed to build more ships. They needed to train more soldiers. They needed to continue developing their technology, not because they wanted war, but because they wanted to make sure no one would ever threaten Earth again. Catherine said humanity had proven something important in this battle. They had proven that humans could stand up to any threat. They had proven that Earth would never surrender. They had proven that you should never mess with humanity. After the ceremony, Jake walked slowly along the monument wall. He looked for names he recognized. He found Stephen Hughes, the old miner who had sacrificed his ship. He found Laura Gibson, who had rammed her frigate into an enemy cruiser. He found Kevin Palmer, who had set his reactor to overload and taken 7 council ships with him. He found names of people he had never met but whose stories he had heard. Young people and old people, soldiers and civilians, people from every nation on Earth, all of them united in death as they had been united in battle. Jake placed his hand on the wall and closed his eyes. He thought about all the people who had died. He thought about how close they had come to losing. He thought about what would have happened if they had surrendered, but they had not surrendered. They had fought, and they had won. That night, news started arriving from other parts of the galaxy. The story of Earth's victory had spread quickly. Other species were talking about it. Some were impressed. Some were shocked. Some were frightened. The Galactic Council had released an official statement. They said Earth had been recognized as an independent sovereign power. They said the Council respected Earth's right to self-determination. They said they hoped for peaceful relations in the future. It was all very diplomatic and polite, but everyone understood what it really meant. The Council was backing down. They were admitting they could not defeat Earth. They were warning other species not to mess with humans. Some smaller alien species started reaching out to Earth. They wanted to establish trade relations. They wanted to learn about human technology. Some of them had been oppressed by the Council for centuries. They saw Earth's victory as proof that the Council could be resisted. Earth was suddenly important in galactic politics. Humans were no longer seen as primitive newcomers. They were seen as a major power, a species that could stand up to the Council and win. Patricia Holland, who had been Earth's ambassador before the war, was appointed to lead the new diplomatic corps. She would negotiate with alien species and build relationships across the galaxy. She would make sure Earth had friends and allies. But she would also make sure everyone understood one simple fact. Earth wanted peace. Earth wanted cooperation. Earth wanted to be part of the galactic community. But Earth would never again be threatened or bullied or told what to do. Humanity had fought too hard for their freedom to ever give it up. Jake Morrison went back to teaching history. His students asked him questions about the battle. He answered them honestly. He told them about the fear and the courage. He told them about the people who had died. He told them about the victory. Most importantly, he told them why it mattered. He said humans had proven something that day. They had proven that no matter how strong the enemy, no matter how bad the odds, humans would never give up. They would fight for their freedom. They would protect their families. They would do whatever it took to survive. That was the lesson of the Battle of Earth. That was the message humanity had sent to the galaxy. You should never mess with Earth.